Anyone who's taken a course with the IWC knows that their logo is a cicada wing. And one week I was just staring at the assignment sheets that they print with their logo, couldn't think of anything to write about, and finally I gave in and said, I'll write a story about cicadas. So this is that. The cicadas were swarming the summer Mart disappeared. Magicicadas, the longest lived of their kind, culminating their 17-year cycle in a massive, desperate orgy as they struggled to secure their next generation before they died. They were an ancient race, the cicadas, a species that had washed up and down the continents like a wave in the wake of expanding and retreating glaciers over hundreds of thousands of years. They grew slowly, cloistered in the warm safety of the soil beneath tree roots, morphing from writhing white larvae into fully armored adults with a singular purpose: to reproduce en masse. Children and dogs all over the Midwest would spend that summer happily torturing the poor creatures as they emerged, huge and black and shiny, from their underground bunkers. Each one a time capsule, unaware of the conditions on the surface, saved from certain extinction only by the sheer vastness of their numbers. Children would sit at the base of an infected oak or maple, hidden from the malevolent sun, and watch the monstrous creatures climb up from their burial sites, the earth first dimpling and then crumbling inward as though sucked down into a drain. The forelegs of the bug would emerge first, followed by its massive flat head and thorax. Then the wide, translucent wings would shake themselves free, revealing a net of thick, blood-red veins. They were an abomination begging to be squashed. Dogs would snatch them up, enjoying the buzzing sensation of their enormous wings fluttering against the roofs of their mouths. Children were more creative. They might pester them with a stick or spear them on a skewer until they had a whole stack of them, writhing and very much alive, as a gory trophy. They might pull off their wings and tape them into notebooks. Or they might simply squash them, smiling at the satisfying crackles of their shattering exoskeletons. Some people called them locusts, a common mistake. Cicadas and locusts occupied completely separate branches on the tree of life. Locusts were a swarm of angry grasshoppers that ate everything in their path. Cicadas were merely ugly and loud. Legends warned of locusts destroying entire fields and villages. The stories about cicadas, meanwhile, were always about excess and abundance. There were so many of them, so fat, so stupid. Marit didn't know any of this, of course. To her, and to most of the young people living in Beaver Creek that summer, their call was simply a part of the air, a droning racket so ubiquitous it became invisible. The summer she disappeared would have been the second time she'd heard them, the first being the summer she was born. On the hottest day of that summer, Mr. Westby stood on the drooping porch of his tired farmhouse, watching a police car roll up the drive. Charles, 5, sat next to him, dragging a plastic toy truck around in a dusty loop. The dog had deposited a cicada in the truck's bed a few days ago as a sort of offering. Still alive then, now stiff dead. Charles was acutely aware of the petulant droning of the Magicicadas, so loud as to be unbearable. But since none of the grown-ups seemed to react to the noise, he didn't either. He was also aware that he hadn't seen his older sister for several days, but since none of the grown-ups were talking about it, he didn't either. Mr. Westby had called too late, and the knowledge of his own failure was gnawing through his gut. Should have done it days ago, when he first knew something was wrong. But this was Beaver Creek, where no one got lost, and nothing ever happened. He'd swallowed down the panic when it rose in his throat, smiled and fed Charles his breakfast, like it was nothing. Like she'd come bursting through the door any second now, tangle-haired and mud-kneed, and tell them a tale about her adventures in the woods that lay between their farm and the town of Beaver Creek. How she'd gone camping and forgotten to leave a note. it wouldn't have been the first time. He tamped down the bile rising in his throat and began humming a quiet rendition of Big Rock Candy Mountain as he waited for the officer, Marit's favorite song, first unironically, then ironically, then back to unironically again. He had the feeling that the cicadas, hearing him, would begin to hum along, that their sound would travel out to wherever his daughter was. Maybe she would hear him. Maybe she would hum back. In the last moments before her disappearance became the concern of the police, of outsiders, he would allow himself to believe in this invisible thread that bound them together, lofted along on the back of the cicada's song. The vehicle stopped just a few feet from the edge of the porch. An officer, neatly dressed in navy blue pants, a bun, and a gray button-down shirt, stepped out and surveyed the scene before her. The house, the man, the dog, and the boy. They seemed like a mirage, born from the angry heat and the inescapable droning of the cicadas. The house's paint, where it still adhered to the siding, was a dirty off-white that peeled like bark from a birch tree. The man was tall and gaunt, like a skeleton someone had quickly slapped some flesh onto, but the boy and the dog looked clean and well-fed. Glossy hair, calm faces, even in this heat. Adding to the ethereal effect, she was sure it wasn't her imagination, was the lonesome sound of a folk tune floating amidst the louder and more insistent symphony of the cicadas. Out in the brown woods, beyond the brown field, on the edge of the Westby property, the small trickle of water ambitiously called Beaver Creek was making its tortuous way south. By the grace of God, it would find its way toward a slightly larger trickle of water, a creek named Ox, which would in turn flow east into the Baraboo River and then on to the Wisconsin. This would eventually form a great V where it joined the mighty Mississippi, which would then roar south through cities and farmlands, all the way down to where oil rigs rocked perilously in the storm-strewn waters of the Gulf. The cicadas resided all along this trajectory, different broods erupting from the thick clay earth in a yearly succession, starting at the Gulf of Mexico and rolling north to the banks of the Great Lakes. If one were to walk, very slowly, along its length, they would never be out of range of the raucous mating calls. If Marit was in range of the cicadas, she gave no sign of it. No secret signal passed between father and daughter. No final verse hummed back over the voices of the magical insects. No matter how hard he listened, all he heard was the incessant wee-oo, wee-oo, wee-oo that had been going on for weeks. Wherever she was quiet.